Alrighty, heck yeah. We are back here, Fossil Creek Nursery. My name is Jackson, the retail manager at Fossil Creek Nursery. I don't think I reintroduced myself last time I did one, so there we go. Class today is all about stomping the chomp here. And I don't just mean insects, I don't just mean rabbits, I don't just mean voles, I mean anything that can chomp and eat on your garden bed, your flowers, your perennials, your trees. There's a lot of stuff that wants to eat your plants out there because they look great and delicious. So, here's going to be the deal with stopping the chomp. There are certain things that we need to, number one, know before we start to treat, and there are certain things we need to know before we start to actually take care of this problem and attack the pest that is going ahead and munching on our stuff. So, first and foremost, good thing to know is that the healthier your plant is, the more secondary compounds or its own self-defense will kick into effect and not have as much of a fleshy and vulnerable plant. So the happier and healthier your plant, the less pests you're going to have overall. So I would encourage you to talk to a nursery professional, come into your local garden center, and if you're having problems with your plant initially, I would first and foremost try and remedy that and get them back to full health. However, things happen, plants get stressed out. Say you just planted a perfectly healthy plant, but that act of planting and the care in the near future is going to be a stressful experience, just like moving. Everybody knows that moving can be a very stressful experience, I'm sure. However, it is important to know that under stress, we become more vulnerable as people, as plants. So make sure those things are healthy. Now, in many of my classes, I like to kind of split things up into multiple categories. That's the best way that I can think of things and the best way that I can explain things. So, for our multi-category today, we're going to talk about the different kinds of pests and the chomps that they can do, good ways to spot them, and then, of course, good ways to treat them. So, let us go ahead and start with some of our mammals. Mammals are a big one. Of course, you're going to have your squirrels and your rabbits and deer, elk, even. They're not really chomping but can damage plants. So all of these are going to be more related to us than any kind of other pest, which means that the control for them can often be difficult. And why I say that is because, again, the closer you are genetically to, of course, a human, the harder it is to kind of weed us out of control for things. Like, there are generally three options if you're trying to remove animals, again, rabbits, squirrels, deer, elk, from your property. The number one way to remove them is by putting something smelly and stinky down. But again, if it's smelly and stinky for them, it's smelly and stinky for us. A great example of that is my deer stopper that I have here, deer stopper. This is a deterrent, and the deterrent, of course, means that we are trying to get this specific animal away without causing it any significant harm. Deterrents generally work for shorter periods of time and need to be reapplied. And again, they often have a strong odor sent to them. The active ingredients, which I don't know if we remember from an old class, but if you're looking at a product at a garden center, nothing matters except the active ingredients. The instructions, of course, are also going to be important, but there are so many different chemicals with the exact same active ingredients. It's just a rebranding way for them to make more money and then use it in multiple aspects. So, again, we have our deer stopper here. The active ingredients here are cinnamon oil, clove oil, and whole egg solids. Sure, those things all smell just great together. But that's my point. There are also other essential oils, lemongrass, things like that you can throw into these deterrents to, again, try and remove the animals from the premises, and they work especially well in mammals. Again, squirrels, rabbits, deer, all those types of things. But again, you need to reapply quite a bit, and often they can wash away if there isn't the proper ingredients in there to make them hydrophobic or keep them from becoming volatile. So, mammals, number one here. You generally don't see a whole lot of reptiles around here, especially none that'll actually munch on your plants. Birds, you're generally pretty good off with. They're going to be eating some of the fruit off your tree, but they should never really cause significant damage. In fact, a lot of them will eat some of the boring insects that will drill into trees and shrubs and whatnot. And then I think, I mean, again, amphibians are the same. We don't have to worry about that. So really, what we need to focus on here now are going to be our insects and our mollusks. So I'll start with the mollusks because I love saying that word and it's fun. And generally, the problems associated with mollusks are not going to be the biggest issue. But again, it's all comes back to environment here. So just like I was talking about, the healthy plants stay healthy and they don't get eaten and they're less vulnerable the happier they are. It goes the same way with your environmental conditions. Slugs and snails are great examples of these mollusks that will start to chew on our plants, especially if the area stays wet. Now, a couple reasons why people will come in and they'll have no idea this is happening, and it's because most of these snails and slugs will only feed at night. So you'll see these holes, these irregular shaped holes in the middle of your leaves, or not really on the edge, but maybe off center. And if you don't see anything eating them, say that your plant is mulched, say that you have it on a drip line, or you're regularly irrigating and not hand watering, you may have an issue with snails or slugs. Mulch is a great way to retain water in the soil, but it can also be a really great way to keep things wet and attract, again, slugs, snails, some of these more slimy guys that will feed specifically at night. So that goes for these. One of the products that is best used to essentially eliminate this issue, there's two that I usually suggest. One is called diatomaceous earth, which has little silica particles in it that are slightly abrasive to these snails and slugs. So that's something you put on the leaves of your plant down by the base of your plant. So as they move across it, the little silica particles abrase their skin and then they can dry out. The second one to use is going to be a iron phosphate. Again, these are all very similar active ingredients. Iron phosphate, that active ingredient is what you're looking for. A lot of people come in, they're like, well, I use this one specific brand of chemical, and I'm like, well, it's the exact same as this one. It's the same active ingredient, just different branding. It is very, very, very similar. Anyway, the second way to kill off some of your slugs and snails is by using iron phosphate. Iron phosphate can be a very effective, actually unlisted organic chemical that you can lay down. It will burn the skin and eventually, again, dry some of those guys out. And again, most of these are not going to be harmful to humans, animals, kids. These are really only meant to kill some of your insects, which are much more distantly related to us, and therefore we can easily synthesize and cultivate these chemicals to eliminate those specifically without having a whole lot of secondary issues for us ourselves. And we live in a very dry and arid climate, so sometimes pesticides along waterways can be a big issue, but again, we're super dry here, so as long as you're reading the instructions and applying via the label, you should be good. But anyway, iron phosphate does not get just slugs and snails. It can also get earwigs, which a lot of people hate earwigs and they want them dead. Earwigs are not eating your plants. I'm telling you right now, they are not eating your plants. They are decomposers. They are not, well, they're not decomposers, but they're eating decomposed matter. They do not really feed on alive tissue. Putting that out there. But this will kill them if you want them dead. So there you go. Also can take care of some of your ants, and again, listed for a bunch of different insects. But go kind of circling back to those mollusks, the slugs, the snails, things that are going to be feeding on your plants, leaving those small irregular holes all over it, again, only feeding at night. So maybe pull back that mulch, let things dry out, and again, environment is important. If you can dry out the area a little bit more, that already deters the slugs and snails, and then coupling it with the diatomaceous earth or this iron phosphate is going to be very helpful to continue that theme. So we got our mammals, we got our mollusks. Oh, There we go. Now we can start to talk a little bit more about insects. And insects, again, the more unhealthy the plants, the essentially more they're going to start to feed on it. So the healthier you can keep your plant would be the best way to go about it. Now I'm going to split this one up even a little bit more. Insects, since they have been such a problem, I mean, ever since forever, people have always been trying different ways to kill them. There are tons of at-home remedies. One of the at-home remedies for slugs and snails is leaving like a cup of beer out and they'll fall in and drown themselves. But there have been specific chemicals and products that have been made and synthesized to take care of this problem with little effect. So right now we are having a little bit of a rise in grasshoppers. They've been a problem in past years. More than likely they're going to continue to be a problem as time goes on. And there are a couple different ways to get rid of them. Aphids as well has always been a big problem. Sometimes you'll get scale insects. Of course, we might be familiar with emerald ash borer, which is killing some of the ash trees in town and all over the country. You also have your Japanese beetles. Some of the tomato hornworms may be eating your vegetables, or other different caterpillars not munching on some of those edibles. I mean, really the list goes on. You got spider mites, you got regular mites. There are tons of different insects and other really small bugs that will feed quite a bit on your plants. But it is important to know what you have on your plant and what the issue is before you start to treat for it. You want to make sure exactly what's going on. So for insects, you generally have two types of insects. Two types. There are piercing sucking insects, meaning that they have piercing sucking mouth parts, like mosquitoes. They pull out a little part, they stick that into the leaf or tissue of any plant directly where the sugars are, and they'll start to pull out from there. Now, aphids will do this. You have your weevils that'll do this. You have any mealybugs or scale that'll do this. Let me see if I can think of any big ones at the top of my head here. That's about it for the really major ones that we see around here, but of course there's a million more. And then you have your chewing insects, which of course have little mouth parts that physically chew and tear away the tissue. Now, that is more your grasshoppers, that is more your Japanese beetles. Some leaf miners actually have chewing mouth parts as well. But you want to make sure that you're actually hitting the right insect at the right time. Now, aphids, part of those piercing, sucking mouth part insects, as well as, again, some of the mealy, some of the scale, they will not necessarily put big holes or dents in the leaf or any tissue of the plant itself. What they will do is they sometimes inject hormones into the plant. Because they don't have a whole lot of ways to defend themselves, they will find other ways to stay hidden. Aphids is a great example, which they inject hormones into leaf tissue, which causes leaves to bump and curl up, giving them a good place to hide. Aphids know they are weak and wimpy, and they use that to their advantage by evolving to inject, again, those hormones in. And that's going to be the same with some of your scale insects as well, or even some of, what am I thinking of here? The thrips, or even, not necessarily a mite, but anyway, a couple of those there. Let me see. The best way to really figure out if you have a piercing, sucking, or, again, chewing insect is going to be the shape of the leaf, what has been happening to it, and the lack or presence of those holes or big munch bites or marks on the leaf. Because chewing insects will be very clear. There is part of the leaf that is missing. There is an irregular shape, generally from the outside in, not from the center of the leaf, that you will see munching has been done. Now, chewing insects will never chew in a straight line. They will never chew in a perfect half circle. They will chew in irregular patterns. If you have a leaf that has a perfect half circle or a very straight and symmetrical line through it, that is not a chewing insect. That is more than likely a leaf cutter wasp or ant. But the wasps, they don't really harm the plant whatsoever. They take a little bit of what they need, they go back to their home, and that's essentially that. They're not leaving anything behind. Going back to those piercing sucking insects, I mentioned how aphids can curl things up, but piercing sucking insects can also vector plant diseases as well. So again, it's important to know what you have, and first and foremost, how to treat it so you don't get problems later on. Now, we'll talk a little bit about control of some of these things. You have your more organic controls, which can be something like a spinosad soap here. Now, spinosad is actually a bacteria, beneficial bacteria that will get onto these insects and start to degrade them over time. A lot of times this will come in a spray bottle. It can also come in a hose end sprayer like this. It can also come in a concentrate, but this is a very good kind of multi-purpose insecticide that will really not have any major or harmful chemical in it. Active ingredient in this one is going to be those potassium salts of fatty acids, which is used in processed foods all the time. But again, drying out and also acting as a surfactant, meaning that it is making water wetter. Once this makes contact with the surface, it just spreads out. It doesn't bead or anything like that. So, very good to use, really good multi-purpose. This will take down your aphids, this will take down any of your caterpillars, your tent worms, this will take down Japanese beetles. But it is important to know that the more organic you go with your chemicals, the more you're going to have to use your chemicals. The harsher chemicals work really well because they are so harsh. If you just go out there with a bottle of soap, water, and cayenne pepper, yes, you will probably kill those insects, but you'll need to spray a lot of it to actually start to work. Same thing with anything like a spinosad soap or any at-home remedies that are organic. Again, you will have to use a lot. Don't expect this to be a one spray and done. And as insects start to develop resistances to some of these chemicals, they can also become less effective. But again, spinosad soap is a good one. Then, and this is very similar to the iron phosphate or to any of the diatomaceous earth. This is more of a dust. This is a dipel dust. Now, dipel dust also works very well on some of those insects that are crawling. Get a lot of your hornworms, a lot of your armyworms, things like that. This will work exceptionally well on. And again, it's a dust you put on your plants, and as they walk through it, they get some of this on them. Now, the dipel dust essentially has another beneficial bacteria in it. This one is Bt. Bt has actually been bred into corn to try and eliminate some of the pests that are there, but this is it right here. It's been used for decades and decades now. Not harmful, and again, as things crawl across it, it's abrasive and then gets that bacteria in there when it can do its work. Will not affect you and me. Bacteria, Bt, does not only come in a dust, it also comes in a spray, and this again is very effective on some of your more fleshy insects, like some of those worms that are feeding and chewing, of course. Now, the things that I've showed you so far are contact sprays, meaning that you have to hit the individual insect or pest to actually have it make any effect. There are systemic chemicals, but we will talk about that here in just a second. So, let us see here. To finish off our little bit of more organic treatments for things, you also have products like a neem oil here. Now, neem oil is not going to kill your insects, at least not unless you use quite a bit of it. Neem oil is a terrific preventative for insect problems. Again, the best preventative is a healthy plant, but if you need to use something to prevent insects from continuing to feed, or you know a plant's stressed out and you want to protect it to, prevent anything from getting on there, that's when your neem oil is going to come in handy. Now, neem is a tree usually found in Asia, but it has recently been synthesized into an oil, the oil from the tree itself, into that preventative spray right there. Again, it is preventative. It is not curative. It's not going to kill your insects very well. It is going to prevent them from starting up. So I would not purchase neem oil as something that, if you already have an infestation, will take care of your problem. that kind of does it for our little organic section over here, which, again, organic chemicals are great. They don't harm other organisms that we are also concerned about, like some of your, fish or birds. There have been many cases where insecticides have harmed other organisms in the past, but a lot of that organic stuff is fairly safe usage, except for bees. Bees are also very, very wimpy, so it is important that not only do you have a healthy plant, know what you're spraying for, and have the good spray, but you also want to spray at the correct time of day. If you're spraying during, mid-morning, during the day, into the evening, may not be a good idea, especially if something's flowering with insects on it and there's a bee that might be there to pollinate. But that's all of our contact. You got to hit the insect sprays over there. Now we can kind of move into some of our more synthetic and, for lack of better words, more effective chemicals for killing some of these major insects or pest problems that we may have. So let us start with different classes of chemicals. So a lot of our organic stuff over here either has something biologically helpful, like some bacteria, or it could just be an oil that's synthesized from a tree, which helps to, again, prevent. It could also be a soap, which spreads out, and that'll spread out the chemical not only on leaves, but on insects. Then we start to get into things like this. Now, I brought these two products up, which I'll show you in a second, for a couple reasons. Number one, it is in one of the most effective insecticide groups called the neonicotides, which is a very similar compound to nicotine, which once sprayed onto an insect, it essentially fires all the synapses in their head, and then they twitch, fall down, and of course die. These are chemicals that you would want to be careful of towards if you're near any waterways or any fish, because sometimes they can have adverse effects. But again, if you read the instructions, which is the most important thing, it will tell you not to spray in certain locations or certain times of day. Very important to know those kinds of things. But anyway, pyrethrin is one of the more common active ingredients that you see around here and that you see as a spray for multiple insects. It is really broad. Actually, pyrethrin is a synthesized compound from a plant. In the I believe it's either a chrysanthemum or it's in the Asteraceae family, but there's actually a pyrethrum plant in which pyrethrin is synthesized from. So if you get it from the right source or it's synthesized the right way, it can be organic. But if it's made without the use of the plant, then it's not considered organic. So again, this is one that pyrethrin you can see organic, depending if it's synthesized from the plant or if it's made in the lab, is not necessarily organic. But again, it is definitely helpful for taking care of some of your insects. It's much more effective. You don't have to spray nearly as much, and if you get the timing right, you barely have to use any at all, and then you can save it for later on. This also has, you could say, with neem in there, contains neem. Another really good preventative as well, but neem oil essentially makes things much more hydrophobic and can clog up some of the insects every once in a while. But very effective chemical. This triple action plus is supposedly labeled to be an insecticide, a fungicide, and a miticide. It is best used as an insecticide, at least in my experience. But it is important that it can be used in multiple different ways and multiple different forms. Now, this one is labeled for quite a few things. Grasshoppers is one of them. It's very important to know that grasshoppers are a labeled insect for some of this, as well as some of your beetles, some of your mites, and other little chewing and piercing, sucking insects. Now, I have this other chemical here. This is a red spider and mite spray. It is labeled for completely different insects, but you may be able to see that the active ingredient on both of these is the exact same. And not only is the active ingredient the exact same, it is also the exact same concentration. So again, pointing out and making sure that everybody knows that just because one product doesn't have the same labeling as another, they may be the exact same product. Now these are slightly different because this one has neem and this one does not, but as we just discussed, neem is more of a preventative, and it definitely aids in creating effectiveness here, but it's not 100% necessary. So, pyrethrins, more of our synthetic chemical that, again, will work on your grasshoppers, work on your beetles, might work on some of your worms, everything like that. Very good to know. Now, I'll talk a little bit specifically on grasshoppers here. Grasshoppers are a huge problem. I have people coming in every single day, and a lot of people are asking for a product called Nolobait. Nolobait is a great product. It essentially is a little nematode, which are microscopic worms that are essentially put onto a vermiculite, and then they're laid out on plants or on places where those grasshoppers like to sit. The nematode gets into the grasshopper, eats away at its stomach, and then eventually kills it from within. Now, Nolobait is very effective, but it's also extremely hard to come by nowadays because no one is carrying it at the moment. If someone did, I would, because it has proven to be effective. But again, Nolobait is great. However, it is not as easy to find, and if you don't put it in the right places, it's not as effective. That's why sometimes using sprays like this can be very helpful, because you're hitting the insect with the chemical right then and there, and it's not organic, so if they keep jumping around, you don't need to continuously spray it, because one spray of your spinosad soap or neem oil isn't going to kill them. And that is because grasshoppers not only have a waxy and hard coating on them, they're also very airtight. They're not letting any water pass because they're so small. They have to keep all the water they can. There's not a whole lot of space or opening in the body and structure of a grasshopper for chemical to go in and do any harm. So, it is important to know that some of these products, your triple actions, are going to be effective and labeled for grasshoppers. Grasshoppers can also be killed in other ways. Many of them are more violent. One of the most effective ways to kill grasshoppers is going outside with a pair of scissors. And if you can just start cutting them up as much as you can, that's really the only way to make sure that they're died off. A lot of people find that maybe gratuitous and brutal, but once your plants start getting eaten by grasshoppers, you quickly come to the realization that that's exactly what you're going to need to do, is get rid of them one way or another. So triple action works, but also going outside with a pair of scissors, or squishing them, or stomping them. You can stomp their chomp quite literally in this case, and make it really effective, because here in a couple months they're going to start laying their eggs into the ground, and they're going to start dying off, and there won't be a whole lot for us to do at that point. We'll just have to wait till next year. So as grasshoppers are small, that is the perfect time to take care of them, because when they're small, they're less hardened off, there's no waxy coating, and sprays work very effectively. But when they're small, they also jump around a lot more, and they're much harder to find. So as they get bigger, again, if you can't spray them or you can't keep them all in place, you may have to resort to cutting them up, stomping them, doing something else. Now, that's a little bit on grasshoppers and some of our chewing insects and different ways, and piercing, sucking insects and different ways to take care of those. And finally, I'd like to visit some of our more boring insects. And I don't mean like not interesting. I mean insects that are quite literally boring into plants, into trees. Most common is going to be the emerald ash borer. Tree and shrub systemic right here is great for that. There's also lilac borers. There's all kinds of boring insects. There's actually parasitoid wasps that will kill some of these insects that are in trees. There are some birds that'll chew them out. But if you can't do any of those things, you can attempt to spray the openings or the holes where the insect got in, but it's not always effective. The best way to kill any insect that is in a plant, whether it be a leaf miner on your vegetables or shrubs or perennials, whether it be a insect that's in the sugars or phloem of your wood, is to use a systemic chemical. Now, this is also effective on a large insect infestation that you may not be able to get to. Say you have an apple tree that is 20 feet tall, you can't get up there to spray. Using a systemic is also going to be helpful for that, but you want to be careful with fruit trees, We'll talk about that as well. But anyway, tree and shrub drench. This is a concentrated drench. This has a chemical called imidacloprid in it. Imidacloprid is also a neonicotide. However, it is a systemic chemical. Now, systemic chemicals, once they are put on a leaf or near a root, the tree or shrub or perennial or vegetable takes them up through the roots and then transposes and transmits that chemical all the way to the end of the leaves where the feeding is being done. Again, this is something that you do not spray directly on an insect or pest. It is something that is taken up through the roots themselves and then moved to all the different parts of the plant. Now, depending on how big the plant is, this can take a long time, but the more vigorous, the quicker it can happen. This is something that will only last in the plant a week or two and then is gone. It will not have any residual effect after that point. This is also called a drench because, again, it's a concentrate. You mix it in water, you pour it on the root zone, and then you're good to go. So, very helpful for insects like leaf miners that are boring into things, or boring insects that are going into trunks, or large infestations that you can't reach. Systemic drenches are definitely the way to go and can be very helpful. Same thing with systemic drench I mentioned earlier about the time of spraying is very important for your pollinators. Systemic also means that it's going to all the flowers as well. So timing as far as that is important. You don't want to be using systemic drenches when things are in full bloom because it may end up affecting those bees, those pollinators. We do not want that to happen. You also want to make sure that you're not going to be eating any fruit if you use a systemic chemical, because I would not suggest that. It would not make any sense to want to ingest a systemic insecticide, and could definitely have adverse effects later on. So if you're using it on an apple tree or something like that, maybe you want to pick off some of that fruit for the year. If the infestation is really bad and you want to save that tree, if it's vegetables, you want to make sure that you're using this very, very early in the vegetable's life or that fruit's life, so you're not and getting any of that chemical into the fruit later on. This is not a death sentence for vegetables. There are many chemicals that are systemic and synthetic that are used specifically for gardens and for fruit trees. And that is because it goes away after a long time. After a while. It's not going to stick around. That chemical is not going to linger. Not the ones that they're making nowadays. These will have a half-life. It'll stay a little bit, but if your plant is young, it doesn't have any fruit on it, it's not going to produce fruit in any time in the next week or two, then it's okay to use some of these chemicals. You don't have to always be breaking your back trying to do organic everything, because a lot of times it can be really difficult. Organic gardening is wonderful, it really helps, but you end up having to do a lot of hand weed pulling. You have to end up just living with diseases. You have to end up just living with insects, which can be fine. If your crop and your yield is good, then that's totally fine. However, don't limit yourself. If there's a big problem and you still want to keep a plant alive, you still want to have a healthy garden, healthy vegetable, healthy perennial, any of these plants, you can use some of these options. You just want to make sure that you're using them at the right time. And if you really want, and really should, you can research these chemicals. See how long they last in the tissue. Systemic chemicals generally will only last a week or two, a couple weeks tops in some of these plants. So again, don't necessarily limit yourself. You can use more than one option. Just make sure you're doing your research, making sure what you have, making sure you have a healthy plant, and making sure that you're not going to be ingesting anything in the near future, week or two after you actually use the product. And there's my little spiel about that. So I guess to kind of go a little bit back over this, guys, we talked initially about some of those mammals and the different deterrents we could use to get rid of them. I brought up this deer stopper here, which is a terrific deterrent, definitely great at preventing animals, mice and rabbits and deer and squirrels by just the smell. There's also a line of products called Plant Skid, which we here at the nursery are going to get more of here shortly. These are generally dried blood, or specifically bovine blood, and they are really great because dried blood essentially is that's picked up by some of these insects, and they're like, oh, something died over here, and something I don't want to go over there because something died and it may want to hurt me. So also great deterrents. We have been using and selling quite a bit of this in place of more violent or smelly methods. And I say violent methods because there are also those as well. Vole traps, if your junipers are starting to get little yellow branches all over the place, or you see little holes in your garden beds, or things are munching away at the base of stems or vines, then you might have some voles, and you could deter them, or again, kill them if necessary. Sometimes it has to happen with some of that stuff. Yep. So some of those mammals there. And we talked a little bit about, well, I suppose some of your insects as well, and then we went over those organic options. Some of them are biologically helpful by some of your Bt or other spinosad bacteria that is going to start to affect and kill those insects. And then, of course, we finally discussed some of our more synthetic methods as well. Now, again, to kind of finish this off and do a last little recap, first and foremost, the healthier the plant, the less it's going to be fed on and harmed and chewed, anything like that. Number one. Number two, you want to do a process called IPM, and that is integrated pest management. You want to, number one, diagnose the issue. You want to see signs and symptoms and figure out whether it's an insect that's killing it, it's a water issue, something abiotic, meaning environmental, not caused by any insect or disease, or if it's, again, disease, insect. Once you figured out exactly what it is, you can weigh your options. Would you like to go something more organic? Is this going to be a better option for me? I have a lot of flowering plants around. I have a great pollinator garden. I don't want to be introducing anything that's going to be harming bees. Absolutely. You can go more towards that organic route. Just, again, make sure you're spraying at the right time of day, and you might have to handle a little bit of munching or a little bit of weeds or a little bit of issues because say your plant has powdery mildew on it, your squash or your pea or some of your vegetables have some powdery mildew and you're wanting to try an organic type of gardening, sometimes you kind of have to deal with it, and that's okay. The powdery mildew is not going to make your fruit or vegetable taste any worse. It's just going to affect the leaves, and eventually you'll just maybe, plant a replacement there if you really want to continue to get that same yield. And then we talked a little bit about some of those synthetic options, again, killing some of the aphids or larger infestations, grasshoppers as well with that triple action. And then, of course, the drench right here. Now, I know I've kind of been all over the place a little bit here today. I tried to keep as much distinction as possible, but of course there's always so much more to talk about. Anybody have any questions right now or any last minute things that I can help out with, or are we just about done here? Just give it 1 second here. Well, I appreciate everybody for joining in. Again, if you have any questions, you can always call us here at the nursery. Again, my name is Jackson, and I hope everyone has a healthy and happy day and that they can stomp the chomp. Have a good one.